You see a picture like this, and yeah, the problem seems obvious, right? Forest loss. But here's the thing, to actually solve it, you can't just look at what's happening on the surface. You've got to dig way deeper into this whole complex web of social and economic forces that are really pulling the strings. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So today, we're going to break down a really critical framework for tackling this stuff: deforestation and forest degradation. This is basically the cornerstone of REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And honestly, if you're trying to build any kind of effective climate action strategy, you absolutely have to get your head around this. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get really clear on the definitions. Then we'll jump into the main analytical framework. After that, we'll see how it all plays out in the real world. And finally, we'll connect the dots to see how this analysis actually leads to smart strategic action. All right, first things first. In the world of REDD+, you have to be precise. Words really, really matter. Because think about it, how you define the problem completely shapes how you're going to try and solve it. So let's talk deforestation. This is all about a complete, permanent change in how the land is used. When a forest gets cleared for something like a farm or a new town, it's just not a forest anymore. And that distinction is absolutely crucial because it means you've completely lost that carbon sink. It's gone. Now, degradation, that's a different beast altogether. And in a lot of ways, it's much trickier. The land is still technically a forest, but its health, its ability to store carbon, it's been seriously hammered. Think about damage from things like selective logging or constant fires. It's not a change in what the land is, it's a loss of its quality and what it can do. Okay, so now that we're on the same page with the terms, let's get into the main analytical framework. See, to come up with policies that actually work, we've got to peel back the layers of the problem. It's not enough to know what's happening. We have to understand why it's happening. This framework basically splits the causes into two big buckets. You've got your direct drivers, that's the what. These are the immediate physical things people are doing, like clearing land. And then you have the indirect drivers, and that's the why. These are the more complex, often hidden forces. Think market demand, government policies, or even poverty that are actually pushing people to take those actions in the first place. Let's make this real with some examples, because it helps a lot. For deforestation, a direct driver might be expanding farmland, right? But what's the indirect driver? Well, that could be anything from global commodity prices to national policies that give out subsidies for certain crops. Or for degradation, the direct driver is illegal logging. But that's often fueled by indirect drivers like, say, weak law enforcement or widespread poverty. And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. If you only focus on the direct actors, like the individual farmer who's clearing the land, but you completely ignore the huge economic and political forces pushing them to do it, well, it's like trying to treat a symptom without ever touching the actual disease. It's just not going to work long term. All right, so much for the theory. Let's get back to reality and see how this framework actually helps us make sense of what's happening on the ground, both on a global scale and inside specific countries. When you zoom out and look at the whole planet, one thing becomes crystal clear. The reasons for deforestation are not the same everywhere, not even close. The mix of what's causing it changes dramatically from one continent to the next. And this is where it gets really interesting when you look at the breakdown. So in Latin America, you see that huge, large-scale commercial agriculture is by far the #1 driver. But then you look at Africa, and the pressure is coming more from local subsistence farming. And this is exactly why a one-size-fits-all solution is doomed to fail. Your strategy has to be tailored to the local reality. So how do these layers, the direct and the indirect, actually interact with each other in the real world? Well, the case of Nepal is a fantastic and pretty complex example of these dynamics in action. And it shows something really important: how degradation can often be the first step towards total deforestation. What they found in Nepal is that degradation is often just the beginning of the end for a forest. It kicks off with illegal logging, which weakens the forest and basically puts a target on its back. Then you have these organized groups, they call them land mafias, who encourage landless people to move in and settle. Those settlers clear what's left for farming, and then, down the line, a little political influence makes it all official. It's this whole step-by-step process, driven by a chain of different people and motivations. And here's the kicker. This entire chain of events circles right back to those all-important indirect drivers. The whole process we just walked through, it's only possible because of them. In Nepal's case, the study pointed to two huge underlying causes. First, a lack of transparency and corruption, which, makes it easy to bribe your way to a land title. And second, weak law enforcement that just can't stop the initial illegal logging or the settlements that follow. So you see, the direct actions are really just symptoms of these much deeper problems in governance. Okay, so once a country does all this work and has this super detailed analysis, what's next? Well, the final piece of the puzzle is turning all that knowledge into a focused and, most importantly, effective national strategy. I mean, let's be real. No country has unlimited resources, right? Or endless time, or political goodwill. You just can't tackle every single driver all at once. So what does that mean? It means you have to make some tough, strategic choices about where to put your energy to get the biggest bang for your buck. So how do they do it? Well, to set priorities, countries weigh a few key things to help design what they call policies and measures, or PAMs. First, they look at emissions, which driver is causing the most carbon loss. But they also have to look at practical stuff, like is this politically possible, what's it going to cost, and this is a big one. They have to analyze the social and economic impacts, the good and the bad. Plus, they look for other wins, co-benefits like protecting biodiversity. This is exactly how you take a giant list of problems and boil it down to a short, smart list of things you can actually do. And maybe the single most important takeaway from all of this is that the world just doesn't stand still. Things are always changing. Commodity prices go up and down, governments shift, populations grow. So analyzing all these drivers, it's not a one-and-done kind of study. It has to be a living, breathing process that's constantly being updated to reflect what's actually happening on the ground. And that brings us to one last question to think about. Looking ahead, with our global population still growing and our consumption patterns changing all the time, which of these drivers do you think is going to become the most critical one to tackle in the next decade? Because whatever the answer is, it's pretty much going to shape the future of our forests and our climate.